Okay, let's try that. There we go. I think now I've got the little green bars moving back and forth. Well, hi everybody. Let's try this again. Welcome back to a Dome and Home special event, the coverage of the launch of the first crewed, not crewed as in rough, but crewed as in with crew aboard, launch of the Boeing Starliner spacecraft. And I'm hoping that you can now hear me. So just let me know in the chat if you don't mind. Still can't hear. Well, geez, I'm not sure why that is. Let's just check. Okay, we should have some audio here. Let's just make sure. Microphone's on. Checking. Can you hear me now? Got it. Okay, great. Okay, so welcome everyone to Dome and Home special event, the launch of the Boeing Starliner spacecraft for the first time with astronauts aboard. Right now, launch vehicle is sitting on the launch pad. The spacecraft is crewed. Both of the astronauts are in their spacesuits strapped in the seats, and the hatch has been sealed, so they're ready to go, and they're now just going through all the various steps before launch. The countdown clock is actually holding at T-4 minutes, but that's misleading because the clock you see on the screen there, the L clock, that's actual time, and so there's a big hold on at 4 minutes, and basically at 4 minutes before the launch, that's when the countdown clock will restart. So right now we're in a planned hold, and this is where they make sure that the vehicle is topped up with fuel and all of that kind of stuff. So they are working an issue in that the launch vehicle, the United Launch Alliance Atlas V, that's basically everything except the very top part of the rocket, has a valve issue that they were working on, and it looked like because of all the safeties involved, if the computers can't sense each fuel valve and make sure that the right amount of fuel is in there, it basically says, hey, there's a problem. I don't want to go if there's not enough fuel. Oh, let's just see what's going on here. I'm just going to bring up my volume. Okay, so I'm listening into mission control just to see what's going on here. I don't think that they are pulling the crew out of there. I think they're just communicating with them. But we'll just see exactly what's happening here. So there was a problem with the launch vehicle, and they were looking at some valves and some safeties and things like that. I'm going to bring up the audio for you folks to hear so you can listen in with me and hopefully get a sense of what's going on here. I'm hoping, oh, it looks like they're taking the hatch off.
So it sounds like that the ULA is still pressing forward, and that allows the pad team to begin hatch closing.
Go ahead.
Without actually closing the hatch.
Have you been
just
able
getting
to
ready.
Restart topping at this time?
Affirmative.
Okay, so it sounds like the launches still go. The view on the camera here made me a little nervous because it looked like they were getting ready to pull astronauts out. Apparently they are now just getting ready to seal the hatch completely. So there's some issues on the rocket where they're just monitoring the, basically what happens is as the rocket sits there on the pad, and you see all that steam coming from it when we get back to one of those pictures, that's the super cold fuel and oxygen being pumped into the rocket. And because it's super cold, it starts to boil almost immediately. And so the steam has to go somewhere. Otherwise, you pressurize your rocket too much and it blows up. So they let it vent out. And they have to make sure that they're putting in the same amounts that is venting out to keep the rocket what's called topped up, so that it's at 100%, so that when the rocket takes off, it's got 100% of its fuel. That's a process that goes on with every rocket. The Atlas V has some significant safety features for the human-rated version, and so if the computer, the master computer, loses control of or loses contact with any of the sensors along that sort of fueling chain, it says, "Hey, wait a minute, I'm not sure how much fuel I should be pumping in because I don't know how much fuel is coming out through the venting." And so that was a concern. They had to do some switching over to the backup sensors. They had to do some switching over to the basic valves. They cycled some valves. They did a bunch of stuff like that. Oh, and ULA is going to come on here.
They issue that right now. Roger. RC, LC.
Okay, they've moved on to something else now. They're now talking about weather. So that's a good sign. Normally, you don't care about the weather if your rocket isn't going to launch anyway. So we are still on schedule for launch in about just under 1 hour and 20 minutes. And everything is now from the ULA side, the launcher side, everything is now good. And they're getting ready to get a final briefing on the weather. And once the weather is confirmed to be go, and last I checked it was 90% go, then they will seal the astronauts in the hatch. You don't want to tighten all those bolts until you know that you're going, because once you tighten those bolts, the only way to get the crew out in case of an emergency is by using the emergency abort system, where the capsule basically breaks off the rocket, fires its own engines, goes shooting up into the sky at very, very high G loads. It's not comfortable. It's survivable, and it's much more survivable than, say, your rocket exploding, but it's not the kind of thing you want to do willy-nilly. So we're going to check the weather. We're going to make sure that things are go. And if the weather comes in go, they'll seal the hatch. Looks like everything is on schedule. I got to say, I've been watching the coverage for a couple of hours already, and watch the crew walk out and head over to the place and all of this stuff. It's pretty impressive how the team is working all of these issues. There's two different companies basically. There's Boeing that runs the Starliner spacecraft. That's the from basically here up, and then you've got the United Launch Alliance, which is a bunch of companies that have come together to build the Atlas V, and that's everything from this point down. And so right now it's a ULA show because they're the ones, firing the rockets, but the Starliner has to be ready as well. And so there's all this communication from 3 different sites here at the launch pad in Florida, at Mission Control in Houston, and also at a Boeing facility or a ULA facility in, I think they said, in Denver. So it really is kind of a wide-ranging event in terms of being able to communicate. Just to run the communications here on the Earth is pretty impressive. Now we're going to pop over to a couple of images here. This is a shot of. Oh wait, we want to come back.
All the issues that are going on in Florida, but things are going fairly smoothly on the Starliner side so far.
And in the white shirt there in the middle there, that's the capsule communicator, Capcom, Canadian astronaut Joshua Kutrick, pardon me. Jeremy's the other guy. They will be heading, Josh will be heading on the next flight of Starliner, so it's very good that he's in the capsule communicator seat. He'll get to understand the crew's experiences from this flight and take that onto his next mission. That's likely.
And with this being the crewed flight, they'll have a number of test or flight test objectives to work through, putting the Starliner systems through its paces to prove them out before operational flight begins. First of those will come after Butch Wilmore and Sunny Williams reach orbit today, when they'll be doing some manual piloting checkouts while they're still well away from the space station. They'll be flying some attitude maneuvers, changing Starliner's orientation, using only visual cues to start with, and then using Starliner's attitude direction indicator, which we use for all of those other planned attitude maneuvers. And they're also going to point the spacecraft's tail to the sun to demonstrate that it can use solar arrays to recharge its batteries.
And once they arrive near station, they'll take over with manual control again to demonstrate their ability to station keep for about 5 minutes at the opening of the approach corridor. And this corridor reaches out to about 260 meters. away from the forward docking port on the ISS Harmony node, or as you may hear later on the broadcast, node 2 forward. This maneuver should be pretty familiar to both Butch and Sunny because it's very similar to flight ops they performed while in the Navy, like lining up an aircraft with a refueling tanker,
Flick LC channel
or a
1.
landing approach with a carrier.
Okay, so just some sort of summary information on what's going on there from Mission Control. Hopefully you caught that Mission Control voice. We're just about 75 minutes away from launch, and they're getting ready to close the hatch on the astronauts. And after that, we have checking the cabin to make sure there's no leaks, making sure the hatch sealed properly. The spacecraft gets pressurized for flight, and then in about probably 25 minutes or so, that's when all of the pad crew, all the folks that are helping the astronauts that are out there at the launch pad, have to clear the pad to get down to the ability for launch. So hopefully we'll get to see that launch in just a little bit under 75 minutes. I'm going to bring you back to Mission Control here so you can hear a little bit about what's going on, and I will be back as soon as we have a little bit closer to launch.
Much appreciated. See you when you
Or longer.
And with Butch planning on staying up there longer, maybe he'll do a couple extra manual piloting demos for us while he's around there. But when they fly with these manual flight controls, it'll be 6 degree of freedom control using both joysticks. One called the rotational hand controller for changing direction. The other called the translational hand controller, similar to a throttle in an aircraft, but instead of one direction, you can go up, down, left, right, forward, and back.
That's right, but we've got to get into orbit before we get to any of that. So we've got another hour and 13 minutes until today's 10:34 p.m. Eastern launch today. Flight Director Mike Lammers has been keeping a close eye on all these activities as crew got into their seats and went through the suit leak checks. We'll have a few more things to watch as we go through the hatch closures, including the capsule leak checks. And in about an hour, Lammers will be polling for a go or no-go here in Houston, hoping to get a thumbs up across the board for today's launch. He'll be speaking for this team when he gives his final go or no-go to the launch conductor about 7 minutes before launch.
And the International Space Station also has to be go to welcome Starliner tomorrow. So let's go back to Space Station Flight Control Room and NASA's Rob Navius for an update. Rob?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Flight Director Pooja Jasrani on console at this hour with the Orbit 2 team of flight controllers. They'll be polling their team to get the green light to proceed with the countdown and the launch that hopefully will culminate with a docking by Starliner to the Harmony module of the International Space Station at 1:50 p.m. Eastern Time on Sunday. During the week or so that Wilmore and Williams are aboard the International Space Station, each dock day will see a different variety of activity for the Starliner duo. On Monday, for example, Wilmore and Williams will continue unloading cargo they brought to the station and will transfer some used emergency equipment from station to Starliner for the trip back to Earth. They'll stow their launch and entry suits aboard the vehicle and conduct a debrief with NASA and Boeing officials about the rendezvous and docking phase of the mission. Once Starliner's batteries are charged through station power resources, Starliner will be configured for quiescent operations. So with hatch closure in the offing and the countdown proceeding for a liftoff 1 hour, 11 minutes, and 40 seconds from now, we'll toss it back from the Space Station Flight Control Room to you folks down at the Cape.
The official broadcast of NASA's Boeing Crew Flight Test, or CFT. What you are seeing now is a live look from one of our helicopters here along the Space Coast, orbiting the Starliner spacecraft atop a ULA Atlas V rocket. Inside that Starliner spacecraft, 2 NASA astronauts, Commander Butch Wilmore and Sunny Williams, pilot.
Maybe I just didn't get it formally from you, but you're back at flight level.
Affirmative.
Roger.
All right. So we have things proceeding. There were a couple of hiccups earlier. If you're just joining us, there were some some sensors on the fueling system that weren't quite reading properly, so they had to switch to the backup and do a few things. And now you can see that steam coming out there. That is the liquid oxygen venting out of the rocket, which it's supposed to do because they're filling it up at the same rate. It's at minus 273 degrees or so. And so that is very, very cold. It boils almost instantly just from the heat of the sun. And so that basically means that you've got, instead of the liquid being in there, it expands into gas. And that's obviously something you don't want happening inside your rocket, because too much expansion leads to a rapid unscheduled disassembly of your rocket as it basically pops like a balloon. So they vent it out and they fill it up at exactly the same rate. And that allows them to make sure that when the rocket lifts off at T-0, you have a full tank of gas. And they do that with both the fuel and the oxidizer, the oxygen, which are the two things that need to mix together to make the engines go, because basically there's no air in space. You got to bring your oxygen along too. As you can see, this is up in the white room, as they call it. That's the hatch to the spacecraft, and they are just in the process of closing that down. It's been sealed now, and then they'll go through all of their pressure checks and so on. You can see behind me the guy with the big blue binder making notes and checking off each step. Basically, that thick, I don't know, it looked like a 3-inch binder would be step by step their entire procedure that they've been going through this whole morning. NASA is definitely very methodical, and that the folks at Boeing and United Launch have inherited that as well, that culture of safety and methodicalism. So, as you can see, they're just finishing up all the details of sealing the hatch. And we are a little bit under, 69 minutes on the way to our launch. Looks like the hatch is now closed. And so next up will be pressurizing the cabin, doing all the leak checks and so on. And then the pad crew will clear and we'll get ready for the final go, no go for countdown. Let's listen in to D. Russell at Boeing.
And here at Hangar AE with the team, monitoring both the launch operation as well as the weather. We got a great weather report from our launch weather officer just a few minutes ago. Winds were the one watch item, and they were driven, as you look at the satellite map, by a high pressure system off the coast of North Carolina that you can see there, that clearing area. You see how it's turning in a clockwise direction. That's what's bringing all of our onshore flow. That is what's driving these winds. You see the clouds going by overhead. So this image from College of DuPage, they've got our GOES 16 data streaming through, and it's a great representation. You can also see the ascent corridor as a result of that high pressure system is also fairly clear all the way up the eastern seaboard. That's the track that Starliner will take. That's good as well. Only some moderate concerns for high sea states because of those winds. But overall, we are looking good in the corridor. We are 90%
LC
go.
Slick on channel 1.
Go ahead.
Hatch closure is complete, and we're moving into hatch gross leak checks.
Roger.
All right, hatch closure is complete, a great milestone that we've reached in this operation to get to liftoff. And just to wrap up, 90% go here at the pad. We're good to go along the ascent corridor, and so for weather, we're looking fantastic for a June 1st day, and which is the first meteorological day of summer. Usually we have rain and thunderstorms this time of day. Unfortunately, we don't. There you see the graphic, 90% go, and everything looking well weather-wise.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. Yes, the microphone. All right. So just to go back here, this is the launch of the previous spacecraft, Flight Test 2, which had nothing aboard other than a couple of crash test dummies, and it went up and autonomously docked to the space station. Today, we'll be seeing the two astronauts aboard. You can see them there in the bottom left, reading up on their procedures for what they have to do as they check to make sure their hatch is closed properly and the spacecraft doesn't leak or anything like that. It'll be launching to the space station for what's anticipated to be an 8-day mission. The first day is basically just launch, get up into orbit. It takes about a 25-hour trip to intercept the space station going around the Earth at 25,000 kilometers an hour. And you have to come up sort of from behind it and underneath it, and then do a little flip around and come in to dock at the front of the space station. That's the docking port that's open. And that's where Starliner will meet up with the space station about a day after launch. There will be all sorts of tests going on even while the astronauts sleep on that first day, just monitoring from the ground to make sure everything is going well. And then they will join the space station crew for 7 days or so. And they have all sorts of activities planned for each day. The spacecraft will be charged up again. Its batteries will be charged up from the space station and then put into what's called quiescent operations, which is basically almost everything's turned off. You don't need any of the docking radars or the fuel systems or anything like that while you're just sitting there, because this spacecraft is intended to go to the space station, drop off astronauts, and then stay there for 6 months or so and then come back. So they want to make sure that it powers down easily and it's ready to go. And during that time, Sonny and Butch will be part of the space station crew. And then probably on day 8, but again, depending on weather in the recovery areas and so on, they will reboard their spacecraft and undock. There's some talk about the potential of a fly around of the space station, like the space shuttle used to do photography of the space station. It's not scheduled for this mission, but depending on how things go, they might add it in. I love those because then you get these wonderful high resolution images of the space station, and we get to see what it looks like from the outside. And it's an impressive piece of technology, but you can also see which parts are the older parts and which parts have taken a beating from space debris and things like that. We've had humans living on it continuously for 23 years or so, and it's starting to show its age. But anyway, after that, the Starliner will return to the Earth, making a hopefully successful re-entry. And then, unlike the Apollo spacecraft that this looks like, it lands on the ground. It doesn't land in the ocean, which is a little bit harder to do because, the ocean's a softer thing to land on, but it's also much more convenient because you don't need a big ship to go out there and pull you back and stuff. Basically, a couple of guys in a 4x4 could pretty much load this thing on if they had a good enough crane. Much more convenient to get your spaceship back. So it's going to target a landing in the southwestern United States and try and get to a pinpoint landing zone there. So that's pretty unique as well. There's a lot of new things on this mission in terms of the way that astronauts are flying. And so it's, in many ways, this is still just a test flight. We shouldn't get so excited that, if something goes wrong or something has to be changed, because that's why you fly these missions. Now, the previous 2 Boeing Starliner missions that were flown without a crew had a couple of hiccups, but were largely successful. Nothing that would have been, a risk to the crew or anything like that. More just convenience kinds of issues in terms of what needs to be done to refly them, because they are reusable, like the SpaceX Dragon. And you get the idea that, it'll be much cheaper to operate these spacecraft if you don't have to, throw the whole thing away and buy a new one. Now, the Atlas rocket is still largely disposable. Pieces do come back down and they can refurbish a few of them, but it's not the same as the SpaceX Falcon 9, which the booster, comes back and does that neat little flip around and then lands all Buck Rogers style. So that's a a difference. But NASA's point with the commercial crew program is that you don't want to just depend on one person. We sort of had that for a while, where after the space shuttle stopped flying, the only way to get to the space station was with the Russian Soyuz spacecraft. And while that's a very, very reliable spacecraft, the most reliable spacecraft in history, flying for more than 60 years in pretty much a similar state, as we saw, it only takes a little bit of political tension here on Earth to make that an awkward relationship. And so it could be the same with a company, or it could be something like, oh, there's an issue with one spacecraft, there's a problem, and it can't fly for a year while they work it out. Well, how do you get your people down from the space station? How do you bring up supplies and food and things like that? And that capability is being tested on this mission, because just yesterday on the space station, a pump failed. And it's not just a pump for coolant or whatever, it is the primary pump for the urine processing system. And so the urine processing system basically takes all of the urine that is generated by the crew and pumps it through a purifying system, and then it's run through a couple of other stages, and it is converted back into fresh, clean drinking water. Yes. And I have to say, I was once at a conference where they did a talk, and then at the end they said, by the way, all the water that's on your table that you've been drinking was processed through this system. And everybody freaked out, but of course we didn't notice, because it was beautifully clear, probably better than any tap water that you would find here on the Earth. Anyway, the primary pump for that failed, and this does normally happen, but they were expecting it to happen in the fall. So they would have to basically store 3 months of urine aboard the space station to get the pump up there in the next sort of regular rotation, because the Russian Soyuz or Progress resupply vessel launched the day before that. And so you really have a situation where you'd have to wait for 3 months. So NASA called up Boeing. Boeing literally went through the packing list. The spacecraft was already packed. It was on top of the rocket. It was ready to go. And they had to unpack exactly the same amount of material that the new replacement pump weighed, and they had to balance the spacecraft out all in basically overnight. So that was pretty impressive. It's not the kind of thing that they're going to make a Apollo 13 style movie about necessarily, but it's kind of like those troubleshooting things where you have all these limitations. You have to figure out how to solve the problem, and they were able to do that. And so now the space station crew will not have to be floating in a space station full of little plastic bags of urine that are all floating around for 3 months. So that's pretty impressive. As we mentioned, there's a Canadian connection to this mission. Josh Kutrick is the Canadian astronaut who will fly on the next Starliner flight late this year or early next year, and it will be his trip to the space station for 6 months. For this mission, he's the Capcom. He will sit at the desk, and he is the person that communicates with the astronauts. All of the radio commands, all the mission control requests, and all that stuff are relayed through him, so that the crew doesn't have to talk to 500 different random voices. They have one person that they can talk to, and you form a relationship with. They're all astronauts, so they understand each other. They work together and train together, and it really provides the crew with a level of comfort that the person on the other end of the line understands the situation that they're in. Now, I said yesterday that, I said on Dome at Home that it's always an astronaut, and for major things it is. For a launch of a manned spacecraft, for example, it is. But there are so many operations happening in space now that a lot of these space station operations are people that are trained as capsule communicators and NASA specialists. They're not necessarily astronauts themselves. They may be scientists or engineers, or they may be specialists in some other field, but that's the kind of thing that is very, is very important because there just aren't enough astronauts. They're all training for other missions. You can't pull them all off that just to have them, be the person on the radio. But anyway, Josh is there, and he is going to be flying on the next flight, and we're very excited about that. He'll be part of Expedition, you can't quite see there, Expedition 72. His patch is hidden in behind our stream. And he's a colonel in the Royal Canadian Air Force, fighter pilot. This is a slightly older picture, but it's kind of cool because he's posing in front of his aircraft. You can see his call sign. Bung is his call sign. And he will be walking across that gantry there, hopefully by the end of this year or into the first quarter of next year. So some pretty exciting stuff. Let's pop back to NASA here and just see what they're doing. We've got a view of the crew, it looks like, and it'd be nice to just listen into what they have to say.
It's like Butch likes to say, half a decade, 5 years or so, and we're as you can see today, and all the work as we were getting ready to launch today, how much Butch and Sonny, as well as we appreciate the whole team that we're part of. Sure. And Butch and Sonny have really expressed their gratitude to everyone and try to include the team as we all go forward on this mission. And so I'm super proud of them, and I'm a little envious, but I'm really happy for them to be this close to flight. 53 minutes to go.
You're not the only astronaut that says that. It's okay.
As the crew aboard Starliner prepares to launch to the space station, let's take a look at what's in store for them, for Sonny and Butch, while on this mission.
The mission of the Commercial Crew Program is to provide transportation for astronauts to the International Space Station.
Multiple providers provide you redundancy. Redundancy is important, as we know. In our systems, we have redundant systems.
But actually, more importantly, it's providing the aerospace workforce the opportunity to test out new ideas, new technologies, and work them into spacecraft. Butch and I are the first two to fly the Starliner, so this flight will be a crew flight test, so there'll only be two on board. We're gonna fly it up to the space station, dock it, and test it all out, and then come back home.
Everything's new. The procedures are new. We have procedures now that we didn't have a year ago because we've learned as the process has gone forward.
We've had 2 test flights uncrewed previously, but this will be the first time we're putting people on it.
We're test pilots, and so we're going to be testing the spacecraft in all aspects of the flight, from launch, on orbit, all the way to entry and landing.
We're testing out the environmental control system. We're testing out the manual flying of the spacecraft. Then while we're docked to the space station, we have a bunch of tasks to make sure that the spacecraft can act as a lifeboat. And just in case anything bad goes on the International Space Station, the crew on board can come to the Starliner and make sure that they're okay.
This has a mode where we call it backup mode, which is your get home mode, if you will. We can, without any communication at all, we can still effect a return to Earth, do a deorbit burn, and hit the point where we're trying to land, even without our computers. You know, that old mantra, failure is not an option, because it's a very dynamic thing we do flying in space, and it's not very forgiving. And we know that, and that's why we have these multiple systems and multiple redundant capabilities, because human life is special, and we want to preserve it at all costs.
I think exploration is just in the human heart. Butch, he describes himself as the first thing he said as a kid was why. And I think that's in all of us. Maybe we don't verbalize it, but we all ask why. And that's what exploration is. It's that next step of why. So why not go back to the moon? Why not try to live on the moon? It seems like a natural stepping stone to the next thing, Mars, which just calls us. Like, why is that planet there? What is the future of that planet? What is the future of our planet? And to be able to take these next steps in exploration, we're going to start answering those questions.
We stand on the pinnacle. This is kind of where everything, integration, everything comes together, which is where Sonny and I sit. And this is just a part of the ongoing process of growing and expounding our knowledge and our understanding of all things
to fly NASA's Boeing Crew Flight Test.
I'm Butch Wilmore, and I am ready to fly NASA's Boeing Crew Flight Test.
And there you go. A little bit about Butch and Sonny, the 2 astronauts aboard the Starliner spacecraft. You can see them there, Butch on the right and Sunny on the left. Their helmets are still open. They'll just lock those down when it comes to launch time. They're sealed in the spacecraft now, and they're checking the pressure to make sure. You can see that at the upper left of the screen there, right over here. Can we see here with the, there we go, right over here. This is the forward hatch. That's the one that docks to the International Space Station. There's a side hatch that they climbed in that's only used for launch and then when you're getting out of the spacecraft. And we've basically got what looks to be a clear view to launch. Oh, hey James, nice to see you. Thanks for joining. Yeah, it's pretty nice to finally be at this point. I mean, Starliner had a number of issues that delayed its launch a number of years. There were some problems with the rocket, some problems with the spacecraft, and then on each of the two test flights, there were a couple of issues that had to happen. Boeing actually has a contract from NASA to pay for all of this, but they took on the cost of launching an extra test flight on their own just to sort of work out some of the bugs, which is kind of nice. And it's nice to see that we have, again, more than one option for spacecraft going to and from the International Space Station. We also have a few other activities that will be going on this week. It's become a really busy week in spaceflight. In 48 minutes, we'll be watching the Starliner launch. Sometime this evening, the Chinese Chang'e 6 spacecraft, which is currently in orbit around the moon, will be deploying its lander, which will land on the surface on the far side of the moon, land, deploy a small rover, take a bunch of pictures, I'm sure, and also drill into the soil, collect some samples, which will then be flown back to the orbiting spacecraft and then returned to the Earth. We've never seen samples from the far side of the moon before. The Apollo missions, of course, brought back rocks. That's all from the near side. Some of the Luna spacecraft from Russia have also collected samples from the near side. One of the Chinese spacecraft returned samples from the near side. But this is in the southern polar region of the far side of the moon, which is a place that is, being considered for things like future radio telescopes, because it's always protected from all the radio junk from Earth. If you're listening to the radio sky and you're trying to hear faint signals from ET or from other distant objects, you really don't want to be hearing, all the radio stations and radars and stuff like that from the planet Earth. It just overwhelms the signal. The only place in our solar system that you can't hear Earth is on the far side of the moon. So it's a great place for science, and near the southern pole is a great place also for human habitation. So that's a cool thing. And if that's not enough, SpaceX has announced June the 5th as the launch of their 4th test flight of Starship. It has not yet received all the approvals that it needs, but they're planning on that date. And the last flight, they announced a launch date, and then the FAA, the regulatory body that sort of signs off on things, gave them their license just the day before, and so they were able to make that timeline. We don't know for sure if that's going to happen again here, but that's a pretty impressive thing to watch regardless of the outcome. It is the biggest rocket ever launched. It's the biggest rocket ever launched mostly successfully. There's some debate about how big it is compared to the old Russian N-1 moon rocket that never got more than about a couple of kilometers off the ground before exploding. But still, Starship is really great to watch. It had some amazing live video of the reentry process that we've never seen before. So that was really exciting. We're just at 45 minutes from launch here. We're going to listen in to NASA TV just to hear what the crew and the commentators are saying, and I'll be back with you in just a moment.
And off the coast of Ireland. Beyond that, it will be able to safely reach abort to orbit, staying in space as an abort. And of course, we're hoping not to need any of those.
Request permission to begin white room closeout.
Roger, thanks, Slick. Blue team, perform toxic vapor and O2 check when raising the environmental seal and configure white room for launch.
Roger.
And Slick, if you get a annulus purge disconnect time.
And once Starliner has made it to orbit, the last major milestone before the crew begins what we called orbit ops is called the orbit insertion, or OI burn. That will move Starliner into an elliptical orbit as opposed
Yeah,
to
and
a more
LC,
circular
this is
one.
Slick. We're calling it 1537 Zulu.
Roger.
Going from a circular orbit, which they after separating from Atlas, into an elliptical orbit, and then from there, Starliner will be on its way to International Space Station.
Yeah, and it sounds like the teams that have been getting Butch and Sunny ready are just about done with their job and ready to move.
Yeah, so they're running, it looks like about 12 minutes behind on the nominal timeline, but we're in what's called a hold right now. We're at the countdown clock's actually at T minus 4 minutes and holding for exactly this kind of reason. You know, they had to spend some extra time just making sure that all of those fueling valves were working properly. They had some time to troubleshoot that. There's some contingency time built in here. So the launch time has not changed and cannot change because it's an instantaneous launch window. If you don't launch exactly at, well, today it's 11:35 and 40 seconds Central Daylight Time, you won't link up with the space station because the space station moves so fast that if you don't get into the right plane at that second, you basically have to wait a day. So they really need to launch at that particular time. So we're still looking for that launch time in about 43 minutes or so. They're just going to sort of speed up and the other tasks and use up their contingencies that there is in this planned hold. And then over the next 15, 20 minutes or so, they'll be starting to do a number of the final polls for getting ready to come into that planned launch time. They'll be talking to the Starliner folks. They'll be talking to the Boeing folks. They'll be talking to United Launch Alliance on the Atlas V rocket. And of course, the range at Kennedy Space Center in terms of weather and, you know, boats traveling into the excluded zone. That's happened a few times in some of the shuttle missions where they had to hold a shuttle off because some idiot in a speedboat decided to go past the safety areas and try and get a nice picture, and it would delay the whole launch. They're pretty good about stopping that now. Oh, looks like we're going to the space station. Let's listen in.
Station. We'll be monitoring your every move on the journey, and we'll be waiting to open the hatch and welcome you to your home away from home.
Butch and Sunny, we know you've waited a while to get your ride aboard Starliner, but we know it will have been worth every minute. So from all of us on the International Space Station, Godspeed, and we'll see you soon.
Nice. Always nice to have friends in high places. So yeah, the space station is, of course, been in space for more than 25 years, but has been permanently staffed with astronauts from, I think it's 16 different countries at this point, for more than 23 years. And that's our permanent location in space. And before it runs out of lifetime and is eventually probably dumped into the ocean, we will wind up inhabiting a new space station, the Gateway space station, around the moon. Now that's a totally different mission, the Artemis mission, but it's kind of a cool thing, and Canada is building a big component of that, you know, leveraging our Canadarm and Canadarm2. We are building Canadarm3 for the Gateway spacecraft, and here's a little bit about, you know, Canadarm's role in going back to the moon. And our contribution of Canadarm is how come we have Jeremy Hansen aboard the Artemis 2 flight, which will loop around the moon, and we have a second flight still to be named on a future mission. Now, starting on Artemis 3, or at least Artemis 4, there will be moon landings as part of those missions. So I'm holding out hope that before the Artemis program gets too far, we will see Canadian boots on the surface of the moon, which I think would be incredible. But again, those are still a little bit up in the air because of the amount of time it takes to undergo these missions. And so we'll have to wait and see. We already have heard rumblings that SpaceX's Starship may not be ready to fulfill its landing duties as part of Artemis 3. There's a different company building a lander for Artemis 4. Again, NASA hedging its bets and not going with any one particular supplier just in case they run into problems. In this case, SpaceX is not really building Starship to land on the moon. They're building it to take lots of people to Mars. That's the goal of Elon Musk, the CEO. And so they're kind of adding in NASA's requirements on the side, but because they're shooting much higher, it's a much more difficult process. And so will it be ready in time for Artemis 3? We'll have to see. But still, companies in the United States are working hard to develop these spaceflight capabilities, much like aviation companies did back in the early days of flight. The aircraft were things that people built in their basements or in their garages or in their bicycle shops initially, until, well, in that particular case, there were a couple of world wars that came that really spurred the push for aviation. We luckily don't have to be driven by war to develop spaceflight at this point. It's much more enlightened topics, I would say, although many of the early days were in fact used or using military hardware, missiles and things like that, and eventually being turned towards more peaceful civilian spaceflight. But anyway, where we've reached now, there are a lot of people interested and capable of going into space. Okay, we can see that they are retracting the crew arm. Let's get back to the main launch window there. I think we're seeing some footage from the re-entry of the last flight. Sorry, I was just listening in a little bit there. So they have a system that allows them to basically use some iPads in case all the computers go down, and they can do re-entries and things like that. Some last-minute instructions on one of the times on one of the tablets isn't perfectly synced. And so, yeah, that's something that they were just getting some last-minute instructions on, just making sure that all that was working. Here on the screen here, we have Mike Fink. He's the backup astronaut for these flights, for this flight, and he'll be the commander of Starliner 1, which flies next year with Josh Kutrick on board. So there's some pretty good stuff going on. Okay, thanks, James. Yeah, I didn't realize that the mission control audio wasn't up for you folks. We're going to listen in again for some of this commentary while we wait for the clock to tick down. We're about half an hour away from the release of the planned hold, and that's when things start to get exciting. See you soon.
It's the culmination of probably 12 years of, just watching and working and getting involved with the development. But I was very excited to see it all come together. It's a little breezy out here, but you can't beat the weather.
Absolutely. It is a gorgeous day. Now, Chris, if you could give a piece of advice to Butch and Sunny and to all our astronauts flying on our commercial crew missions, what would it be?
Well, Butch and Sonny are pretty darn experienced. They probably don't need my advice. But what I would say, on a very first ascent of a vehicle and a reentry, I would say take it all in, experience it. Think about what you're feeling, what you're experiencing, what's staging going to be like, what's it like when the parachutes come out, because these are questions that everyone's going to know when you get back, right? We want to know, did we build a vehicle that's comfortable to fly?
Absolutely. We can't wait to know. I mean, we're all taking it in here too. Chris, it's our understanding that your fingerprints are all over the spacecraft, in particular the launch console and displays. What can Butch and Sunny expect to see and experience aboard Starliner for their flight, and how does that compare to flying the space shuttle?
Yeah, I think the idea behind the design is to make sure that the crew always has reasonable awareness of what's going on. I remember with the space shuttle days, sometimes the displays were a little archaic. You had to really almost have a graduate degree to understand exactly what you were looking at. So the idea is to make it a lot more airplane-like, because the crews are very experienced pilots and aviators, and for the next generation of Starliner astronauts to come along, we want to make it very intuitive. So we've reduced the number of switches to the bare minimum. The shuttle had 1,000. We have 25 maybe. I don't know what the right number is, but it's a very streamlined. It's capable of being flown by a single person. So there's a lot of, I would say, upgrades that make it safer and a lot more flexible than its predecessor, the space shuttle.
Definitely.
So they're clearing the pad now. You can see the astronaut van that the crew rode to the pad, as well as some of the other crew leaving, and that's a good sign. Normally they won't do that until they are sure that they're not going to need to get the astronauts out. So everything is proceeding apace for a launch in 32 minutes and 32 seconds. And just as an aside, the young lady interviewing the gentleman on camera there was one of the people that I hung out with when I was down at the Cape for the Psyche launch last October. And she was just about to move into the position of the person who ran that program. So if you sign up for the NASA social media program, and it's a great program where basically you put in an application and you tell them, I do stuff on social media and I want to basically come down and view this launch. They don't pay for it, but they give you the backstage access. And so if you feel like going down to Florida and spending a good 4 days or so touring behind the scenes, like really behind the scenes of NASA. We talked to the NASA deputy administrator. We talked to a bunch of astronauts. We got to sit inside spacecraft. It was amazing. I highly recommend that NASA social media program. They take a new crew of people for every launch. So if you want to sign up for that, I highly recommend it. So we're 31 minutes away from launch. And, oh, hi, Vivian. Nice to see you. Thanks for joining us. It's looking like a good day to launch a rocket. Yeah, we should totally go to Florida. They have not yet announced the program for Artemis 2 because, of course, the date for Artemis 2 is not set. And even the date for Josh Kutrick's flights on Starliner 1 is not set. But when they do, I'm certainly going to see what ways I can get down there, because I did have the opportunity to go down in the pre-9/11 days when security was much less of an issue. The Canadian Space Agency invited Science Center people down to see Marc Garneau's third and final shuttle flight aboard STS-97 in, I think that was 2001, maybe in 2000, no, November 2000. And again, we had to pay our own way, but being able to go down to the space agency and not just pay for a tour, but be toured around by Canadian astronauts and go to a cocktail party with all the Canadian Space Agency people. The Canadian Navy was down because Marc Garneau's a Navy commander, and they took us out on a pair of these Kingston class basically mine vessels, minesweepers, and they're very maneuverable ships. And so we went out and saw the shuttle from the ocean side the day before launch, and the two ships were jockeying for position to sort of take pictures of each other with the shuttle in the background. I discovered my tolerance for seasickness that day. Not very high, it turns out, but it was an amazing opportunity. And I was aboard HMCS Glace Bay, and the crew and the officers were just amazing hosts. We had a great time despite the queasiness. And when Canadians go into space again, I'm hoping that there will be other kinds of opportunities for people to see that. Hi, Hollis, nice to see you. Down in Connecticut, I'm glad you're having good weather. Yeah, it looks like the entire eastern seaboard all the way up is pretty clear, which is great because that's where the rocket goes. It goes from Florida up off the eastern coast. You might, I don't know if you can see it all the way up in Connecticut, but there was a map on NASA's social media page that basically showed the ranges of where you would be able to see the rocket in the sky, probably just as a contrail or as a moving bright light, because of course it's daytime. But you should check that out. You might be able to do that. Hey, Ben, nice to see you as well. Thanks for joining us. Just want to see how many folks we have here. Oh, great. Lots of folks joining us for our wonderful Saturday morning launch. I much prefer these Saturday mid-morning launches to the 3 in the morning launch or the really late at night. It all depends on when the space station is going over, of course, and that's that's the limitation. You have to go when you can get to where you're going. This is pretty much where, oh, we've switched cameras there. This is pretty much where I stood to watch the Psyche mission, right by the clock there. There's the Atlas on the pad, and essentially, you've probably noticed that both myself and the folks at NASA are now filling air because there's a bunch of things going on behind the scenes. The mission control folks are making sure that everything is running and working back in Houston there. The folks at Kennedy in the launch center and in the Boeing control center and so on are all doing all of their final checks and things like that. They're making sure that the crew arm gets retracted. They're switching the spacecraft to internal power, all that kind of stuff. But none of that looks like anything. It's basically just, we all want to see this part, right? Where, the fire comes out the bottom end and the top end is pointed at space, and that's how you get to space. But there's a lot of things that have to be checked and double checked and triple checked. And we're still in the middle of sort of the troubleshooting phase, which goes right up to about 4 minutes before launch, where they can sort of pause, do some sensor readings, call in the experts to look at things to make sure everything is going to work properly and so on. We can still see that the spacecraft is venting that steam there as it's supposed to. That's the topping up of the fuel tanks is what they had issues with about 2 hours ago, but they managed to resolve all of that. And so the spacecraft is fully fueled with its super cold liquid oxygen and rocket fuel. And that is basically expected. I remember the first time I was watching a launch of the space shuttle doesn't really have that as much, but of launching a rocket like this, it's like, oh, what's that steam? Oh, it stopped. What does that mean? Oh, it started again. What does that mean? Back in the day when we didn't have, NASA TV on the internet, there was such a time, believe it or not. And yeah, we went to space before we had computers on our desk. And in fact, there's a direct relationship between the one and the other. I mean, in the 60s and I guess even into the 70s, computers were giant things that filled a whole room, and no one had really looked at miniaturization because there was no need to. Because why would you need a computer in your house, or why would you need a computer in your car? But then they had to build a computer to go to the moon, and it had to be small. And that kind of opened people's eyes, I think, to the idea of, well, if we could have a small computer on this spacecraft to do this, what else could a small computer do? And now, of course, we all walk around with more computing power than the entire Apollo program had to go to the moon with. I'm sure we would have discovered miniaturization eventually. I mean, space wasn't the only reason, but like many things, space was the reason it happened so early. um, you know, that push to go to the moon the first time with a deadline for political reasons between the Soviet Union and the United States, that really drove a lot of things that probably wouldn't have been invented or worked on for 20 or 30 years at that point. And suddenly we jumped forward in technology several decades in one decade, and much of the world has basically been sort of humanity trying to catch up to that technological leap, because technology has continued to increase faster than our comfort with technology. And you know, when I was a kid, I had computers and I did all these things, and now I find that I'm much less able to adapt to all of the changes and things like that. I guess that's, you know, that's the human experience. But the space age, I think, was really the beginning of that push to make technology do the most that it can as fast as it can. And that's what's giving us the opportunity now to see these folks go into space. The Atlas V rocket is actually an extension of the original Atlas missile, which was the first nuclear missile that was used by the United States. Well, not used, but maintained by the United States. It's also the booster that took John Glenn, the first American to orbit the Earth, into space. And so it's kind of neat that, you know, here we are 60 years later or so, and the same basic idea of rocket has been modified. It's on its 5th version now, and it is still flying. And today, hopefully, we'll be taking Butch and Sunny into space to the International Space Station. Let's cut back to NASA here and just see what's going on. Oh, you may notice our museum logo has taken a change for Pride Month. Happy Pride Month, everyone. Here in Winnipeg, the Pride Parade is tomorrow on Sunday, and the museum will be part of that event. And there's all sorts of events already going on all throughout the city, and I'm sure in many other places as well. So happy Pride Month, and we'll see you at the parade. Let's listen into
an anomaly on the ULA side.
What they're saying
not
in the
a
ULA
big deal, but let's give them a little bit of perspective on that.
Rocket.
Sure, Lauren. So we had, we did hear a report of a noisy temperature measurement, and this particular measurement is the interstage adapter, but so that's the adapter between Atlas and Centaur. And this measurement is something that's automatically disabled when we enter our terminal count at T-minus 4 minutes.
Oh, minus
but
22 minutes.
Over the past few minutes, we've observed this measurement bouncing around a little bit. So now that the vehicle is fully loaded with propellants and we've been stable for quite a while, this measurement is really not something that we rely heavily on when we're fully tanked and stable. So we're going to go ahead and disable it early rather than waiting for the automatic disable as we approach terminal count. And that just would prevent any what we'd consider to be a nuisance alarm at this point. So nothing major there. It's kind of a standard operating procedure for a noisy measurement like this.
And we are just a little over 21 minutes out from launch.
Logo suppressor charge is complete.
Roger.
As I was saying, just a little over, right now, about 21 minutes out from launch. And I've been thinking a lot about Butch and Sunny going back to the ISS for a 3rd time for both of them. You know, Sunny told us that really the ISS feels like home for them. If you think about it, they've both spent a good portion of time there. They both spent 6 months in their first trip up and 6 months in their second trip up. So now going back for their 3rd time, they're going to a place that they consider home. If you think about living somewhere for literally a year out of your life, you know, it means a lot to you. It's very special. And Sunny even told us that...
Go ahead.
Step 90, all secondary decoms verified on RF link.
Roger.
And Sunny even told us that she cried the last time she left the ISS because she thought it would be her last time in space. So you can just imagine how special this trip will be for both her and Butch. And we are getting very close now to that moment where they are going to be headed to space.
Well, that's cool. So the next thing that we're waiting for is a call from NASA to basically bring down the visors of the helmets and lock them. And that will be putting them onto their internal suit, oxygen and power and things like that. And oh, there we go. That means like they don't do that until they're ready to go. So everything is go for launch. You might have heard a little bit there about a temperature sensor that is being turned off just to avoid nuisance alarms. The last thing you need is an alarm going off and freaking everyone out when it's not something that really matters. Lots of prep just to get that spacesuit ready to go. Seat belts nice and tightened. You certainly don't want to have a loose seat belt on a flight like this. And of course, part of that is because of the potential for emergency. I mean, the spacecraft can separate from the rocket if there's trouble. It has its own engines. It has an abort system that allows it to fly free of, say, a problem with a booster, or if it goes off course or something like that, and then land automatically. But that kind of emergency abort, they don't worry about crew comfort. They worry about crew survivability. And so really, it's the kind of thing where you can be moving at incredible accelerations. You know, you hear about G forces. A roller coaster might take you up to 2 Gs. The regular launch of the shuttle goes from 3 to 5 Gs or so. Most people pass out about 8 Gs. An abort system usually is between 15 and 20 Gs because it's trying to get you away from what could be a massive explosion of your rocket. So it needs to move really fast. And hence, you don't want anything loose in the cockpit. You don't want, anything not strapped down. You want to make sure your headrest is, locked in place and so on. And that's what they're getting ready for. So we're 18 minutes away from launch. In about 10 minutes, that's when they'll do the final polls for a go or no go. Until then, we're pretty much, well, I won't say waiting. There's stuff going on behind the scenes, but the main visible thing will be at about T-minus 11 minutes. That's when that crew access arm that is still sort of right up near the rocket swings out of the way completely. And from that point, the abort system is armed so that even if something happens on the pad, there's not enough time to swing the arm back into place and get people out. You just have to use the abort system. And they delay those things until as late as possible in the process, because you really want to make sure that if something goes wrong, you have enough time to just get the crew out without using that abort. It really is an emergency abort. They've never been used in human space flight from the United States, which is a good thing. There was one Gemini flight where the rocket lifted off and the engine cut off almost instantly, and it moved a few millimeters and landed back on the pad. And so it was basically a fully fueled bomb that the crew was on. Gemini did not have an abort system. They had ejection seats. And no one was quite sure that an ejection from the ground would be survivable because you're so close to the ground, your parachute might not open. The crew on board managed to decide that it was safe. They didn't need to eject, and they were able to get the tower up there and get them out safely. There was a Russian abort a couple of times. Soyuz 18, I think TM-18 was going up, and the rocket went out of control, and the spacecraft was separated by the abort system and landed in the middle of nowhere in Russia. And it took a couple of days for them to be rescued because they were just so far from anywhere. But everyone survived. So that's what that's all for. And luckily, we don't have to use any of that stuff when everything works right. And that's what we like to see, because obviously these rockets are very complicated devices, and that's why it takes so long to launch them. You don't just get in and turn the key and go away. There's a lot of things going on, and the astronauts for the launch sequence are largely along for the ride. I mean, the spacecraft is doing things on its own with the automatic computer. It's being overseen by the folks in mission control, and they're the ones that are probably going to see any problem before the astronauts will. And in case of a problem, the astronauts may not be able to act as well if they're getting tossed around or things like that. So the folks on mission control are really watching all of that. Hollis, it looks like you won't see it quite as far north as you are. That's too bad. I know that depending on the angle of flights from Florida, they do go over sort of in that direction, but they tend not to go inland. They tend to go, out to sea. So it has to be the right angle for you to be able to see it. Probably a night flight would be easier because you should be able to, see it easier in the darkness. Okay, 15 minutes. The crew has closed their visors. What else do we have here? Coming up at they should be going through the polls now. Let's listen in.
Starliner, LC, com check on channel 1.
See, we got you loud and clear. Looks like we got all suit fans failed a warning.
Butch Wilmot.
And I copied your com check, Starliner. In Capcom, did you catch that message?
And Starliner and LC Capcom A-Firm, we see the messages. We're working, more to follow. Stand by.
And that was Josh Butrick's voice. Sounds like there's
Butch
another
Wilmot has a warning
indicator
light
that
on
they
his
have to deal
console.
with.
He's talking it over to Capcom. While they do that,
Starliner, visors open, please, while we work the suit fans. Visors open.
Okay, that's an interesting call. It sounds like one of the suit fans that provides oxygen to the crew has stopped. And so they're opening up their visors. The last thing you want to do is be sitting inside a bubble that there's no air going inside. They're just going to do a little bit of a reswitch because, of course, they have redundancy here. So it's a matter of switching fans and so on. But opening up their visors first is good to just make sure there's a good flow of air. Still looking like we're going to be okay getting all this done as long as the backup fan works. I feel for Butch and Sonny because they've been here before in terms of, strapped in, ready to go, and then something goes wrong.
with that having a warning, they've asked, Capcom has asked the astronauts to pop open their visors so they can get some fresh air, and they'll work it into a redundant mode, going into a redundant suit fan. So they continue to work that. As we get under T-minus 12 minutes and counting. The Boeing team working an issue in real time right now.
LC Flight Channel 1.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the condition we're in an LPT condition with both suit fans down. We're trying to get these reactivated, but we're going to proceed.
Roger. So good to stow the crew access arm.
I'm go.
Roger.
Okay, as you heard there, they're going to be proceeding. They'll be able to switch over to the backup fans. It sounds like both suit fans failed, but they are confident they'll be able to do this before launch time. And so they're continuing with the counts. We have the crew access arm is going to be pulled back, and that's the thing that, that's the gantry they walked across. Boy, there's a lot of patriotic stuff, imagery here. Hey?
Feeling great, excited, making sure teams work to troubleshoot the last little bit, and hopefully we'll see liftoff today.
I'm very excited for Butch and Sonny, and as we like to say, go Atlas, go Centaur, go Starliner.
Go Butch and Sonny, that's right. All right, so let's send it over to the ASOC where Lauren and Dylan will walk us through the final moments of the countdown.
All right, thank you, Megan. So what we are looking for next here is that crew access arm to start making its way back over.
Starliner, on our end, we brought suit fan Bravo back on. It looked good. We need both. We need to prove that A is also there, so we're commanding Alpha on and then off at this time. More to follow.
All right.
Yep, we see it. And we're still visors up, so you know.
All right.
So you hear this troubleshooting happening in real time. They are moving forward with everything else while they troubleshoot
Flight
that
verify CFT
soup
100
pan.
on internal power.
Verified.
Starliner, configure ordnance for launch.
Second work.
Starliner on internal power now. The spacecraft is running completely on its own. Ordnance has also been configured for launch.
LT
That
flight
means
channel
the
1.
devices
Go
that
ahead.
initiate our separation
Yeah, we
events.
reactivated Suitfan Bravo. Suitfan Alpha is also working, so we cleared our LTC condition. And for the crew, you can take visors down.
Well, that was fast work. Everything is working again. They just basically cycled the power and got everything working. That's good. They're putting back their visors. And you heard the call there, the spacecraft is on internal power. And also, they've armed the ordnance. Ordnance is, military terms for explosives. And those are the explosive bolts that separate the spacecraft from the rocket in case of emergency. Because there's no arm there for them to jump across to escape, at this point, if something goes wrong with the rocket, that's their only option. But luckily, we're only 8.5 minutes away from launch. So the odds of that happening are pretty darn low. Things have been going actually really, really well. We get to listen into all these troubleshooting kinds of things. But if you think about, when you get into your car, how many of us adjust the mirror or, adjust the side mirrors, change your seat, maybe loosen your seatbelt a little bit. We don't even think about that kind of stuff. That's what's going on here. Basically, you're strapping into a much more complicated car and you're just making all the adjustments that you need to, you set the temperature properly and, somebody that used it last had the heater on, so I have to change that. It's the same level of stuff. We just put a lot of emphasis on it because it's NASA and everything could be life-threatening, we think. But really, this is the way rockets go. They're complicated. We're now into getting ready for the terminal count.
Prior to status check.
Waiting for the go, no-go calls from all the different sites. Oh, they're not doing that on the main loop. That's too bad. We should be hearing the flight director go around and say,
be a little more quiet as we get closer here to launch, so we can listen into all of the actions.
And saying, booster, are you go for launch? And they would say go or no go. So sort of the last chance to call a hold if there's an issue. We are 7 minutes from launch and we are looking forward to a great flight. I wish I was there. I mean, the weather looks great, would be a great view. The Atlas V is a big rocket and it gives a big boom as it takes off.
Sensor systems, propulsion, go. Pneumatics,
go.
LO2, go. LH2,
Go.
has gas,
Go.
electrical systems, airborne,
Go.
ground,
Go.
facility,
Go.
RFFTS,
Go.
flight control,
Go.
GCQ,
Go.
op support,
Go.
comm,
Go.
umbilicals,
Go.
arm control,
Go.
ECS,
Go.
redline monitor,
Go.
quality,
Go.
op safety manager,
Go.
ULA safety officer,
Go.
vehicle system engineer,
Go.
anomaly chief,
Go.
range coordinator,
Clear to proceed.
flight director,
Houston flight is go.
Starliner,
Starliner, go.
launch director,
You have permission to launch.
proceeding with the count. ALC, verify T0 is set for 16:25:40 Zulu.
Verified.
There we go. We are go for launch. Everything is proceeding apace, and we are looking forward to a launch in just over 5.5 minutes.
BMCC, ASOC, Atlas. This is a great day to be proud of your nation. And all of you listening as well, whether you're at Banana Creek or the Causeway or the rooftop of LCC or the ASOC, and other places around our nation, like the Bay Area building and other places where you are viewing what's taking place. Again, for you, it's a great day to be proud of your nation, great day to be proud of Boeing, great day to be proud of ULA and NASA. And we are one nation, under God, indivisible. And when we together use the power of that combination, we can do some pretty amazing things. So LC, with that, we are ready to put some fire in this rocket and propel this spacecraft to the International Space Station, where all these fine Americans have designed and have prepared it to be.
Calypso, take us to space and back.
Roger, Starliner.
So the big patriotic speech there by Butch Wilmore. I rather liked Sonny's better. Calypso, take us to space and back. Calypso is the name of the spacecraft. It's flown once before as a unmanned test flight. I'm using unmanned instead of uncrewed because when you write out crewed, C-R-E-W-E-D, it makes sense. But when you say it out loud, it sounds crude, like rude or unfinished or things like that. So it doesn't translate. I'd love to have a better name for human spaceflight that isn't gendered and also doesn't sound weird when you say it out loud. So if anybody thinks of one, let me know because I've been racking my brain for more than a year now. We are on automatic count. Uh-oh.
LC switch is not ready. Clock stopped at T-minus 3 minutes, 50 seconds. Starliner, you should not hear any vent at this point.
Starliner standing by.
Somebody didn't have a switch in the right position. LC is
ALC
launching
reset
vector.
countdown clock to T-minus 4 minutes and holding. Active.
If they're resetting the clock, then we will have lost our launch
LC,
opportunity.
P2.
However, they might
Go ahead.
fast forward.
Sensor tank pressures are stable.
Roger.
LC, Peony 1.
Go ahead.
Atlas tank pressures are stable.
Roger. OSM, place SRB ignition SNA switch to disabled position.
SRB ignition disabled.
Let's see if they can get this recycled
Okay,
and turned
console,
around.
step 60. Report launch vehicle status. Atlas lead.
Atlas tank pressures and helium bottles stable. Atlas propulsion system stable.
Roger. Centaur lead.
Centaur tank pressures and helium bottles stable.
I'm not sure if they are recycling this to try and make their launch time, or if they are recycling this. I don't think we will make a launch time if they're going through some checks here, because the launch is in just under a minute. Just over a minute, pardon me. Let's listen in.
Avionics system stable.
Roger. And LC can verify no indications of hazards. Flight, LC.
LC Starliner systems are stable.
Roger. Starliner, last arm switch to off.
Last arm switch is off.
That is a scrub, I think. They just deactivated the launch abort system, which means Starliner will not be going anywhere. It sounds like there was a switch that was not set properly. I don't know if that's a manual thing or just someone saw an anomaly and hit the hold button. We're going to listen in and see.
Flight mode, SSVAPs inactive, OCU safe, and EDS in test mode.
Roger. Arm control, deploy the crew access arm.
Nope, they are pulling the crew out. So something went wrong in the last minute and a half of the countdown that called a hold, and they weren't able to recycle fast enough. If this was just a flight to orbit, the crew could just launch later, but because they're docking with a moving target, if you miss that 1 second launch window, you can't catch up. It's not so much a speed issue. It's because when you go up into space, it's really difficult to change the plane of your orbit. The path around the planet pretty much stays stable, and you can go higher or lower, but to move side to side requires a huge amount of fuel. And in fact, spacecraft never do that. You have to launch into the orbit of your target if you're going to try and dock. And so that means that it looks like our launch for today will not proceed.
CST 100 power to external.
And yep, I mean, we're past the launch time and we are past any possibility of launching, and they're going through the systems to safe the rocket. So next up will be, they've moved to external power. Soon they will start topping up the tanks and let the fuel bleed off as they move the arm over to get the crew out.
LC LOX 2.
That's really disappointing. I'll be quite interested to hear what the issue was. Although Boeing has said, we'll launch when we're ready, and it is a brand new spacecraft for human spaceflight, so you want to be careful.
Go ahead, Peony-1.
Atlas pneumatics, pressure stable.
Although I have to say, it's nice to not see what we would call go fever. There were a couple of times in the space shuttle program where, that probably won't be a problem. Let's just go anyway because we've waited so long, and then you go, and then the space shuttle explodes. The Challenger accident was purely caused by go fever, as well as a bunch of other systemic problems at NASA where you had gotten sort of complacent. It's really nice to see Boeing not getting complacent with things like crew safety. And, especially since even though Boeing Space Systems and Boeing Aircraft are not the same company, they are separate completely. Boeing hasn't had a lot of great press lately. And so I think that they're being extra careful. And, what can you do? I mean, Butch and Sunny will get up there eventually. The biggest losers from this particular event will be the crew on the space station who were waiting for that urine pump to come up on this mission. And so they do have a launch opportunity tomorrow with a launch at 11:03 p.m. Central Time. So we will recycle back for that. I am not sure that we will be able to cover that live through Dome at Home, simply because tomorrow is also the Pride Parade, and I'm supposed to be part of the museum contingent as part of that. So if we aren't able to recycle our Dome at Home event, you can always watch NASA TV or spaceflightnow.com. They both have great live coverage of this. Boeing also has some coverage, but they tend to, they're creating it so that someone like NASA can fill in the gaps. They're really not providing, full coverage necessarily. Let's listen in.
Station.
Go ahead.
True access arm is deployed.
Roger.
We did have a automatic hold of our ground launch sequencer shortly after we began our terminal count for today's launch attempt. No indication yet as to what caused that hold of the automatic ground launch sequencer. The team is still evaluating data. In the meantime, the team is active recycling the vehicle to a good holding state so that we can prepare for our next steps. But for now,
Roger.
We are holding at T-minus 4 minutes, recycling the vehicle after a hold of our ground launch sequencer shortly after picking up terminal count for today's launch opportunity.
That was an update from NASA that said nothing. Yes, we have recycled and we're recycling to the T-minus 4 position, but they didn't say we're not launching today. That's, maybe that's them just reading the appropriate script or whatever, but at this point, they can't launch today. And so it would be nice to get confirmation of that.
Tell has gas normal scan pattern included cap. Roger.
See if I can get something from the other loop here. So for those of you just joining us, it looks like today's launch has been, well, NASA has not called it a scrub. However, the launch attempt window, the instantaneous launch window today has come and gone.
Channel 1.
Let's listen in.
Roger. Secure CST-100 prop system. Last valve to remain open.
Flight copies. Probably take us at least 5 minutes here.
Yeah, copy.
They're going through all the procedures required to basically shut everything down. Oh, here we have an update from NASA.
For some continuing coverage of our current
FTS,
status.
LC.
Daryl?
Thanks, Dylan. And I'm listening to the NASA operations manager's loop.
Recycle status.
Recycle.
Roger. SYS, LC.
Yes, LC, GC30 is ready.
Roger.
As you mentioned, the ULA team now safing the vehicle, making sure all the high energy systems that were prepared to launch are now put into a safe configuration. At 12:21 p.m., roughly T-minus 3 minutes and 39 seconds, we got a hold.
Launch Director, LC, Channel 1.
LDM1.
Yes, sir. So we had a hold call at T-minus 3 minutes and 50 seconds by the CCLS launch sequencer. So at this time, we've completed our recycle back to T-minus 4 and holding configuration and ready to proceed with a scrub crew egress operation.
Yeah, roger that. Stand by.
Roger.
There you heard confirmation of the scrub call for this launch attempt today. Again, this was the ground launch sequencer, essentially the computer that launches.
LC.
Roger.
This is the computer that is in
Okay, all
charge.
personnel going to Operation 85. OSM, LC.
OSM.
Establish the BDA roadblocks and open the flight hazard area.
Roger.
And all personnel on Channel 1 will be starting an approximate 65-minute hold at this time for flight crew egress. All systems maintain T-minus 4 and holding configuration.
So they're maintaining T-minus 4 configuration, which basically means all of the explosives are safed and all of the, the last minute stuff that we were talking about that they do at the last possible minute is sort of undone, but they will not be flying today. Don't be distracted by the T-minus 4 and holding. The launch is scrubbed. They are taking the crew out, and they will hopefully later today do a press conference letting us know what's going on or what went wrong. It seems like as soon as the computer took over at T-minus 4 minutes, 10 seconds later it called a hold automatically. So it was nobody pressing a switch. It was actually just the computer sensed something was not right. Now, it might have been a real problem. It might have been some of the issues with the sensors that they were having, where they switched off some sensors. It might have been those suit fans that they had to play with just before. Maybe one of them failed again, and therefore the launch was scrubbed. It's hard to say exactly what's going on. Oh, here's the other view. This is the sunny side of the spacecraft. That's Sonny Williams on the left, and Butch Wilmore is on the other side. You can see all of the stuff they're bringing up in terms of cargo and things like that. I think on the left is the big toilet pump that is supposed to make its way to the International Space Station. Poor Butch and Sonny had each one of their personal suitcases removed to make room and weight for that. So instead of having their own wardrobe that they were going to wear in space, they'll be wearing the contingency outfits that are just stored on the space station, probably exactly the same clothing. But I don't know, it's always nice to not have to wear someone else's pants, you know what I mean? It's too bad though. So we will have to wait to see what NASA has to say about what went on here. Well, actually, sorry, not NASA. This was not a NASA call. This was United Launch Alliance. So it wasn't a Boeing call either. The spacecraft, the Starliner, was perfectly ready to go. This seemed to have been a launch vehicle issue. So that suggests it wasn't the suits. It would have been something else. Anyway, we'll have to wait and see. We will expect a new launch tomorrow at 11:03 Central Daylight Time. That is the next launch window opportunity. If they aren't able to get things ready for that, they have another launch opportunity on June the 5th and June the 6th. And if they don't make either of those for whatever reason, at that point, the rocket will have been on the pad for too long, and they will have to take it back to the vehicle assembly building and switch out some of the self-destruct mechanisms that they have in case of emergencies on the rocket, because those are only good for so long before you have to test them and make sure that everything is working. So that'll bring our coverage of the Starliner spacecraft to a close today. Again, if we are able to, I will update our Dome at Home event and we'll be back with you tomorrow. If not, please watch on NASA TV or spaceflightnow.com, who will both provide coverage. And we will provide you with whatever information we can in terms of what went wrong here. Waiting patiently for the first human flight of the Starliner spacecraft. Thanks for joining us, everybody. I'm Scott Young, planetarium astronomer at the Manitoba Museum. It's been great spending the morning with you, and have a great day, and we'll be back together soon.